Do you remember learning about the justice system? Like when you first realized that it existed? I think that our lives are organized in ways we can't easily see by the systems of justice that we operate in every day, every week, every month, every year, and yet they are invisible. We suffer from system blindness, human beings, because it's much easier to see direct cause and effect relationships between two entities than to see a complex network of a system in interaction, right? I think I learned, one of my earliest moments discovering the existence of the justice system was in first grade. I was on the playground at Oxford Elementary School, just down the hill, trying to learn how to hula hoop. And I don't remember what color the hula hoop was that I was trying to not successfully spin around my body with my hips, but I do remember one moment when I picked up that hula hoop and tried to spin it and knocked it right into a girl who was standing right behind me, who I had no idea was there, and who promptly fell flat on her butt and started crying. And the yard teacher, and for whatever reason she had the capacity she had that day, didn't see what happened, but saw this oversized first grade boy standing with a hula hoop in his hands, looking, I'm sure, kind of shocked, and a little girl sitting on the floor crying next to him, and her response was to put me on the bench. And what I learned in my body that day was that I was dangerous, that my body was something to be worried about, the way it could hurt other people. And I learned the seed of our justice system's question: when something goes wrong, ask, who is to blame and how should they be punished? We create these systems of justice from the largest scales down to the smallest. And unless we work really hard at it, unless we make an intentional choice and work really hard at making it otherwise, the systems of justice that we create in our families, in our workplaces, in our spiritual communities, in our own heads, they'll reflect the justice system of the dominant culture. Our punitive, retributive justice system that happens on the smallest scale, and of course, this week we're seeing it play out on the very largest scale. As Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Iran go to war in a way that for many of us feels like a terrifying signifier of possible things to come. There are groups this week, starting today, ritualizing, remembering not just the anniversary tomorrow of the terrible terrorist attacks on October 7th, but recognizing today, October 6th, that there was a history to all of this that started before that day. Recognizing in mourning, in grief, that awful act and the tragedy of the day tomorrow, and then continuing to create ritual and work together on the day after, because so much worse slaughter still has happened since. So many who are wrapped up in an unending cycle of the same old retributive, punitive idea of justice. Dominic Barter is the friend of mine who introduced me to that idea of system blindness. He travels the world teaching about restorative justice and trying to work with communities to put restorative justice systems in place. He says that what we need to do fundamentally is reorganize entirely around a different set of questions. If the question that we're asking right now is who is to blame and how should they be punished, and have an entire system that is built up to answer that question, what we need is as robust a system that asks a different question, a question more like, what has been broken and how can it be restored? It's a question rooted in the truth that the restorative justice activist, prison abolitionist, and police abolitionist Mariam Kaba says, no one enters the cycle of violence for the first time by committing it. No one enters the cycle of violence for the first time by committing it. So to have any hope, I think, at transforming the kind of conflict that we're worried about at the largest scales, we're going to need, in order for our species to survive on this planet, we're going to have to learn how to do it in little ways. We're going to have to practice with the small stuff so that we can work at the big stuff. Another congregation I served was at Loggerheads, about an old fund. Some folks long ago, none of whom were still alive, had given money to the church in the name of a beloved previous minister who also had engaged in what we would now term misconduct. And this fund in his name was a source now of controversy in the community. What to do about the good intentions of the past with the realities of the present, and how to move through a fight about money. Anybody ever have a fight about money? And so as this conflict culminated, as it came to a head with a congregational meeting, I felt the panic in my body. I felt that urge as a leader to take responsibility for the whole situation. This has to go well. I need to make sure everything is okay and everyone is okay and this doesn't blow up too big. And you know that feeling in your body of being responsible for a fight. We're going to have to reimagine fighting. Dominic would say that, people keep on having to eat, so we have a kitchen. People keep on needing to sleep, so we have bedrooms. People keep on fighting, but where are our fight rooms? Well, we have our punitive justice fight rooms in the court, so we need fight rooms in our communities. We need fight rooms for our families. We need fight rooms where we have our fights in a way that reflects our values. John Paul Lederach has been working on this question for a long time. He's the director of a program in peace studies at Eastern Mennonite University, this well-regarded program in international peace building. And he has evolved his vision of how social change happens over time. He imagined at first the pyramid, the society as a pyramid, right? You have elites, people in decision-making power at the top. You have large groups of people who are less empowered to make those decisions at the base. And this first model, he said, there's some important insights here. The people who are capable of making this change are the ones who are connected both horizontally and vertically. So it's the middle-out approach to social change. You need these connectors, these integrators who can communicate with the folks horizontally in a broad way and move up and down between power levels in the community. But he began to feel like even that was too static a model, and he started instead to wonder if we could look at a model for how social change happens that comes more organically from spiders. He describes the way that spiders weave webs. They start with a careful observation of the space where the web is to be woven. What are the actual contours of this particular place? They make a few connections through a central hub, and then these outer anchors lead to an inner connection. So you have outer anchors at the edges of things, those places that are sometimes never thought of in the decision-making, but that anchor it all. And then they make connections through an inner hub. There is a center. But then from that center burst outer circles, radii, that create the strength of the web. He says the goal of the spider's web is to be able to take a blow without the whole thing collapsing. And so the web has to have an interdependent structure. Everything has to be connected with localized independence, so that the strength is not all dependent on one place. So even though it's all connected through the center can take a blow and the rest of the web holds steady. It has to have coordination throughout without centralization. So we get these auxiliary spirals, the beautiful spirals of the spider web coming out, connecting each piece in a new way than those circles and radii. And part of what he's observing as he calls us to be web watchers, to have the patience and creativity of the spider, is that this is a creative process. It's not a process by rote. I think we sometimes imagine that spiders or whatever, any kind of creature out there, is just going about doing its routine business based on its pre-programmed DNA. This is what it's made to do, and it just goes out and does it without any consciousness. But David Abram, that eco-philosopher I mentioned last week, he says there is a creativity, there's a necessary creativity that the spider employs. He says whatever instructions are enfolded within its living genome, they can hardly predict the specifics of the micro-terrain within which the spider may find itself at any particular moment. They could hardly have determined in advance the exact distances between the cave wall and the branch that the spider is now employing as an anchor point for her current web, or the exact strength of the monsoon rains that make web spinning a bit more difficult on this evening. He's telling this story from a moment in a cave in Indonesia. And so the genome could not explicitly have commanded the order of every flexion and extension of her various limbs as she weaves the web into place. However complex are the inherited programs, patterns, or dispositions, they must still be adapted to the immediate situation in which the spider finds herself. However determinant one's genetic heritage, it must still be woven into the present, an activity that necessarily involves both a receptivity to the specific shapes and textures of that present, and a spontaneous creativity in adjusting oneself and one's inheritance to those contours. I know that's a lot. I'm just going to read that last sentence again. However determinant one's inheritance, this cycle of violence, whatever it is that we've inherited, it must still be woven into the present, an activity that necessarily involves both a receptivity to the specific shapes and textures of that present and a spontaneous creativity in adjusting oneself and one's inheritance to those contours. Okay, I think this is the point where I have to confess that I don't actually like spiders at all. As my family can attest, I'm the first one to scream and fling at them in the car. I've had some unsafe moments in the car, noticing a spider next to me. It's instinctive. But I once remember laying down in a round yurt in a moment when I had been blown open, finding an old wound reopened by work that I was engaged with a group of teenagers at a family camp. One of them, after a solo experience, was gripping tight to this clothespin that he had received from a camp that had become this symbol of what I believed to be his sense of burden for all the world's pain. And how, especially as a young white man, to engage with that burden. And I saw my own stories and journey reflected in him, and I so wanted to unburden him of that. And I was concerned as he became unresponsive in a group closing moment, and he wouldn't respond vocally to anything we said. I was really worried about him. And in trying to rescue him, in trying to rescue my own younger teenage self, in trying to rip that burden from him, I did that young man harm. And now I was lying on the floor of this yurt watching a spider, feeling pain for my own actions, for the world, for the pain that had led me to do what I did, for a pain that would soon turn into a moment of psychosis and deep trouble for me. But in that moment, I patiently watched this spider weaving her web up on the ceiling, and I knew in some way the truth that the human soul, the unburdened human soul, the true self, knows what justice feels like, the way that a spider knows how to weave a web. And the trouble is that we've built so much, we've hardened so much that gets in the way of that knowing. The static architecture of society that has tried to find technical solutions to paper over our broken webs has forgotten that all of our problems are essentially relationship problems. That the most fundamental power is relational power. This is how Lederach talks about it. He says, paradoxical by their very nature, relational spaces create social energy that is simultaneously centripetal and centrifugal. Now, I'm not sure which one is which, actually, but you know what those are, right? In and out. In our physical world, on the grandest scale, the place of the sun, that extraordinary and nearly uncontainable planetary body that sends out life-giving energy and around which the planets of our galaxy rotate and are held within a certain order. In our social world, a family typically has this characteristic. It sends us out into the world, yet we return to it for a sense of identity, direction, and purpose. Centrifugal and centripetal. Faith communities, chosen families, even geographic locations provide a sense of identity and also have this centrifugal, centripetal capacity. So how do we build, he asks, a strategic structure of connections in an unpredictable environment, a structure that understands and adapts continuously to the contours of a dynamic social geography and can find the attachment points that will make the process stick? Constructing social change is the art of seeing and building webs. The soul of sustaining change requires the craftsmanship of a spider. So I convinced myself in the congregational meeting when it was coming to a head, that fight that could have broken out and had people back in those parking lot conversations. You know those parking lot conversations. I convinced myself to sit down and shut up, to sit there doodling a tree and watching the web unfold as members of the congregation, other leaders took responsibility for the covenant among us and spoke from their hearts. And from that, not the most polarized positions in the conflict, but slightly less polarized people on either side were able to see one another's points, to hear each other's needs, to come together. They ended the meeting by deciding to table it and put it to a committee, which, felt like, oh boy, we know what happens when you do that. But within a week, They had gotten together, talked it all through, created a solution that worked for both sides, and moved on. We can live up to our covenant. We can have fights in a way that moves us forward. We are a people of covenant and we prize it. We talk a lot about it in Unitarian Universalism. The thing that we struggle with, the thing we don't talk so much about, is what happens when it gets broken. When I was first learning about restorative justice, all of this stuff that I've been talking about, I talked with Sean Parker Dennison, who was once an intern minister here. He said, this is so important because we don't, as Unitarian Universalists, we don't have a theology of forgiveness. We're skeptical of a ritual like confession or even like the Jewish teshuvah because they point at that theology that we've rejected, a theology that emphasizes a human depravity that can instill religious shame. What we're working at is to figure out how to take accountability outside of a punitive justice model, how to differentiate, and this is what we're going to talk about, in the weeks to come. How do we differentiate accountability and punishment? How do we weave a strong web of justice from both accountability and from mercy? So we're working at these rituals today of repair and forgiveness. And I think we mostly think of forgiveness as like a resolution, like that moment on the playground where you're supposed to just shake hands and apologize and move on. Or the final dramatic coda of a story of suffering where it becomes one of redemption, or the scorned lover who finds it in her heart to take her spouse back, or the bitter son who reaches out and finally reconnects with a lousy father. In this story, forgiveness is an act, the culminating act in a process which is required of us to release the resentments and grudges that weigh us down. But I haven't found that it really works like that in my life. In fact, I think holding forgiveness that way can feel more like a burden, like another stone on the heart, something I really should have done already, something I would really need to get to, something if I were really spiritually mature, I would already know how to do. But forgiveness, the invitation, I think, is something deeper than that. It's about an invitation to a different way of life. It's about giving myself permission to start over and over again. It's not the final harvest, but the seed of a new possibility. In that other way of thinking, resentment becomes the opposite of forgiveness. I've thought that way a lot of my life. If I'm holding a resentment, then I haven't done the forgiveness thing yet. But I actually don't think that that's true. I think that forgiveness and resentment are not opposites, but in fact, resentment is a guidepost in the way of living that is forgiveness. It's an experience that points me towards what I need to hold, what I need to feel. This way of thinking about forgiveness transforms resentment and regret and self-loathing, even the desire for vengeance, into guideposts, useful energies, information in the process of transforming pain into possibility. And so the opposite of forgiveness as a process is not any feeling, not any part of us, but instead the process of enacting vengeance, of staying caught in the cycle of violence. I'm going to invite us as a close here to engage in what Rob Eller Isaacs, one of my childhood ministers, called a litany of atonement. So I'm going to invite Hillary and Andrea to come on up. We're going to read some words and then invite, as a response to each of these words, everyone to just turn and say to one another, "We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love." I think Rob wrote these words in part because he was someone who maybe needed a little more forgiveness than most. But we do. We all need it. And this first part, forgiving ourselves, might be the hardest step for a lot of us. So remember to tap your chest whenever you need to. We're going to sing the words first. Our song leaders will teach it to us. We'll sing it once together, and then we'll sing it twice more at the end. Try singing that once together. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. Andrea is going to share a sentence, and after she finishes, I invite you to just turn and say those words. Just say them. We don't need to sing for now, to someone near you.
Silent when a single voice would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time we have struck out in anger without just cause. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others.
We give ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone.
We begin ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For losing sight of our unity.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. We forgive ourselves